Let me clear up a quick common misconception here about Scripture and about that comment that I made about wife being property of the husband. The Bible, in its relationships between man and wife, is rooted in co-equality. Now, most people think, well, maybe not most people, but a lot of people think that the Bible is chauvinistic, that it teaches the oppression of women, that men are to keep women under their thumb, and that it doesn't talk about equality at all, and when it's putting man always in the leadership position, and that a woman can't speak and can't preach and blah 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 blah. Well, the problem with looking at it that way is, again, you're taking your 21st century mind and saying that something like child rearing is not as important as leading a church or leading in government. So the man is oppressing the woman by having her raise children while he goes and leads the church or whatever it is that he leads. It's ridiculous. Our society may have put those kinds of importances and those kinds of levels of importance on certain functions, but God has not in the Scriptures. So we can accuse God of all we want of being a chauvinistic pig, but He's not. And the Bible is very clear on it when you look at things in proper context and without these presuppositions. Again, our minds are very, very influenced by the environment and the times that we live in. Okay? Here's a statement that Mr. Jordan makes on page 28. For the ungodly, as section A showed, all relationships of life tend to be swallowed up into attempted suzerainty relationships or sovereignty relationships as man tries to play God. Thus, the ungodly man rules by lording it over his subjects. Interdependence is abolished. The godly, on the other hand, being restored to God's original social design, are to rule in a non-suzerain but co-equal manner. So in other words, when you see a husband, and even a Christian husband, who lords it over his children, lords it over his wife, he's a drill sergeant, he doesn't coexist with them, but he is always in a domineering position. He is being an unbiblical man. And if he is an ungodly man, one who does not know Christ, he's got a much bigger problem. He doesn't know the Lord. And his first tendency is going to be lording it over his subjects. And men and women do this too, but mostly men, because we're more predisposed to it as men. In the workplace, as bosses, men do this all the time. I've seen it time and time again in my own professions, in teaching and in painting and carpentry. I've seen it in all aspects of life, and I know that you have too, that if you're watching this video. Just quickly, in regards to children, in biblical household slavery, and the analogy to children, Mr. Jordan says, the household slave has the same status as a child. Both are regarded as property, Exodus 21 verse 7. Both may be and should be beaten to correct their faults. We're not talking about violent beatings here. We're talking about correction. We're talking about spankings, that kind of a thing. Proverbs 29 verses 19 and 21, and Proverbs chapter 13 verse 24. You can look those up on your own. And a man named DeVoe points out, and Mr. Jordan quotes here, he, the slave, really formed part of the family. He was a domestic in the original sense of the word. That was why he had to be circumcised, and you can see that in Genesis chapter 17 verses 12 through 13. He joined in the family worship, rested on the Sabbath, Exodus 20 verse 10, 23 verse 12, shared in the sacrificial means, Deuteronomy 12, verses 12 and 18, and in the celebration of religious feasts, Deuteronomy 16, verses 11 and 14, including the Passover, Exodus 12, verse 44, from which the visitor and the wage earner were excluded. A priest's slave could only eat the holy offerings, Leviticus 22, verse 11, which visitors and wage earners could not, Leviticus 22, verse 10. Abraham's relations with his servant in Genesis 24 show how intimate master and slave could be. Proverbs 17, verse 2 says, "Better a shrewd servant than a degenerate son." He could share in his master's inheritance, Proverbs 17, verse 2, and even succeed to it in the absence of heirs, Genesis 15, verse 3. How many black slaves in our own American history could do that? We know of one slave who married his master's daughter in 1 Chronicles 2, verses 34 through 35. In these last two cases, obviously, the slave was ipso facto emancipated. Finally, believing, Mr. Jordan says, like children, outgrew and left the household. Thus, household slavery is a labor relation in which the laborer is legally regarded as the property of the master and socially regarded as a member of the master's household, and which is sanctioned by the infliction of physical pain. In the case of slaves who are not covenant members, slavery is involuntary, permanent, and involves no financial remuneration. It's also clear that the Bible approves and even commands some forms of slavery. The thief who cannot pay is to be sold for his restitution money. Exodus 22, verse 3. This is not an option. Restitution must be made and no alternative is available. We have the same laws in our own time. If someone steals, they are a thief. They go to prison. What do they do in prison? Well, first of all, their freedoms are taken away. Now, there's different levels of taking away freedom, but their freedoms are taken away. They are put in prison, and what they are made to do? They are made to work. And they make restitution for what they've done, and at a certain time, in many cases, they are released. So just in wrapping up here in this part 2, I want to talk a little bit here about the cause of slavery, and I'm going to read at length here some sections from Mr. Jordan's book here, because I think they're really poignant and they explain things very, very well here. He starts by saying, "Suzerainty slavery is a consequence of the fall or rebellion of man, and clearly is a curse." There's no question that biblical slavery in many ways was not a pleasant thing. It's part of God's judgment upon man. Now, all of us, take biblical slavery from thousands of years ago out of the picture for a moment and think about now. There are forms of slavery still in existence today, and every person, especially the one who does not belong to Christ, is a slave. You are a slave to sin.